Hello, everyone. Blessings and manifestations. Welcome to Queer Black Feminism 3. I am so excited, so excited to bring you our latest iteration of the ongoing discussion and dialogue around what is Black queer feminism, how is it affected by all of us, how do we have a role and part in it. And so today, I bring you the New Haven Pride Center and Pride Week brings you three amazing folks who are going to hold and host this conversation and really begin to really continue, rather, to expand on how feminism is so deeply connected to queer identities and how Black queer feminism is really the saving grace for us all, whether you are Black, whether you are queer, whether you are a femme body or a woman body. And today's discussion, we're going to be centering Black queer feminism and the trans identity. So I would love to welcome and bring on our moderator for today's conversation, Karleigh.
Moderator? Huh? I just found out about this moderation thing 1 minute ago. You brought me in to be a moderator. Well, I'll do my best. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karleigh Chardonnay Webb. I am an organizer, an activist, an athlete, and I run my mouth a lot. And I'm also a proud member of the New Haven Pride Center. And before I go any further, we are talking about Black queer feminism today, but I want to take just a quick minute to remember a white sister and a white comrade in struggle, Maya Leonardo. And I dedicate this ground to her today in many ways. As a friend, as a comrade, as a fellow trans person and fellow socialist within the Party for Socialism and Liberation in struggle. Maya, we miss you, but the work will continue. And like I said, my name is Karleigh Webb, and today I've got another friend and comrade in struggle here with me, and we're gonna chop it up a little. We're gonna chop it up for this next hour or so about Black queer feminism. What does it mean? What do we do with it? What do we do with the power with the power that we have? And where does this movement go next? And I'm not alone in this discussion today, because along with me is a good friend and in many ways an inspiration to myself within this continuing struggle to find a place, find a space, take up space, and add on to the space. Ravyn-Moulton is with me today. And Ravyn, introduce yourself to everybody and tell everybody what your name. Hey, where you at?
So my name's Ravyn. I'm mad because I'm joking. Remember back in the day when we used to have the radio and they were like, "Oh, tell us why you're mad." Kind of reminded me of that. But my name's Ravyn. I am a trans woman of color. I am also really open and cool about stuff, and a feminist. I'm a Black trans feminist. I've actually been a feminist since third grade, which is interesting because people back then were like, "What is that?" And I was the kid who was like, "I'm that." I don't know what the fuck it is, but in third grade, I knew I was a feminist. And then it wasn't until college I was like, "Okay, let's take this feminism thing seriously," and I took feminist theories as an elective. But yeah, that's about me.
Well, Ravyn, let's talk about that for a minute. Why do you consider yourself a feminist?
Because I exist in this world, and shit's hard, and we gotta acknowledge that.
No, and there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah, no, I'm getting a phone call right now, which is really awkward. But so the reason I became a feminist is because I've grown up my entire life in a single family household with just my mother, and there were little things that I didn't associate necessarily with feminism until way later when I started to understand what the actual definition and like the thoughts behind it was. Where like, it's part of our society. So for instance, I had a friend back in elementary school who comes from like a very conservative Italian family, right? And me growing up in that single family, just my mother and me household, I had a lot more knowledge about the world than he did. So this one particular day, he was talking about how people can only have kids if they're married, and me being the kid who both parents aren't married was like, no. And that's what kind of like started me on this like feminist thing, understanding that like, yeah, things were different back then. Let's start with that. Things were a little different back then. But overall, like the idea that we have to kind of force ourselves into these not ideas. We have to force ourselves into these kind of structures and these societal norms that people created way before we even existed, and we have to do it or else we're just like the oddball or like something to be disrespected or uncared for, which is a direct correlation to LGBT issues. But yeah, that's long-winded way of saying how I got into feminism. Little things like that. Just knowing a little bit more about the world than the people around me.
Well,
Not saying I'm cocky.
Well, now one thing, in your view, where does Black and queer play into your feminism? Does it play into your feminism?
Well, interesting thing. I don't know her name, and I apologize for not knowing these people's names, but intersectionality, which is a sociological term that people use. There was a Black woman who came up with I'm multitasking, so ignore me. There was a Black woman who came up with the term. So, like, being able to identify as intersectional as more than one thing started from Black feminist thought, believe it or not. Yeah.
And you're talking about Kimberly Williams Crenshaw there, and
Karleigh,
I'm right with you, and I'm right with you in line with that, because for my own self, either all the work we do, be it work in regards to feminism, be it work in regards to all the different issues that come about. And we're going to be getting in that throughout the day. I look for my own self in the work I do in regards to anti-war, anti-imperialism, in regard to trans rights, in regard to LGBTQ rights, police brutality, workers' rights, healthcare. If we're not looking at it through an intersectional lens, we're spinning our wheels. And I think that's one of the biggest things that all our communities need to understand. One thing within that, because we need to talk about this, and since this is Fall Pride Week up here in Connecticut and up here in New Haven, there's something that's very important in this discussion that has to be talked about, because right now, one of the things we're fighting over is the Equality Act in this country. And we're fighting over probably the largest, and we're seeing perhaps the largest attack on the rights of LGBTQ people literally since the 1970s in this country right now. And within that vein, to me, if we're not being intersectional across the board in all our struggles, if we're not really looking at this with a critical eye and understanding that we all have a stake in it, no matter where you are, especially within our rainbow family, if you don't understand that, even if you think you don't have any skin in the game, you have skin in the game, we can't win the game. So to me, that's where my Black, my queer, my feminist, my socialist, my anti-war, all the things that I am, all fall into line for me, is because we need it. We cannot win this struggle with each Pete's doing their own thing. We have to fight all the fights.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
All the fights.
That's the only way we can actually get to a place of like true solidarity.
True solidarity in the long term, but also to get a lot of short term things done, because there's a number of short term things we need to get done. For example, one of the most pressing crises we face here in Connecticut is housing for our LGBTQ family. And if we're not looking at that intersectionally, especially with the rent moratorium, now the Supreme Court decides the rent moratorium, okay, we can end that. So we can throw a lot of people out in the street in the middle of a pandemic, which is in many ways getting worse.
True. With the different strands and all that, the mutations of the original strand. Yeah.
And also with especially our young people. And especially with our young people. And I want to go into that question right now, because Ravyn, you work with a great deal of young people. You also work with the housing question. And in this state right now, LGBTQ housing insecurity and shelter insecurity is past a crisis level. We're in the red zone in regards to the crisis we're in. And within that in mind, especially for our young people, our youth, our gabies, as it were, why is what we're talking about essential to a liberated queerness? And how can young people embody that? And also, how can those of us who are adults and elders in our community, how can we also be a part of that embodiment?
That's a whole lot to ask in one. Ask one question at a time, Missy.
well, let's start up front. How do we get our youth across? How do we get our youth across the spectrum to understand that if feminism is not involved in the work you're doing, your work you're doing is not worth doing? How can that add to liberated queerness?
I also think it's important to acknowledge that some LGBT people aren't. Skin folk
ain't kinfolk. Let's just get there. Let's go there.
That's one way to put it.
You can be gay and be anti-gay.
Oh yeah, 100%. But yeah. So personally, I like to talk about myself sometimes a lot more than I probably should. But going with the housing crisis. So for me, and I'm only going to talk about myself because that's just the safest way to go. When I was growing up, I always had a very difficult time finding security. And that's because every couple of years I was getting kicked out of my mother's house for something relatively insignificant that she kind of blown out of proportion, right? So from elementary school till college, I never knew what real stability was. And that's kind of what but like, it's kind of what made me want to seek community. The thing is, when I looked for community in the school I was going to, the issue came down to, well, I've got Black issues. I literally had someone tell me once that I can't relate to them because the issues that I go through are Black crazy people issues, and like they can't relate. And I'm like, but you can, because what you're describing to me sounds similar to something I've gone through, but because of that Black aspect, there's difference, you know?
Now, and that's one thing in that, because we being Black, being trans, and also being trans people, even at the time, if we didn't know it, in the egg state, as the younger people would say.
Yeah.
First off, how did you deal? So much of our identity and our lives gets policed, whether it's state-sanctioned police, whether it's family, community, church, wherever. How do you combat the self-hatred that the world tries to put on you? Because the transphobia and the dysphoria is everywhere around us.
Yeah.
How do you combat that?
Honestly, I'll go back to Black feminist thinking. Because again, that's what started the idea of having multiple identities, but it also acknowledged that there's different struggles between each identity you may have. So first off, being able to name who and what you are and having a community sense of community to share that with people similar to you, but also being able to understand that it's not just a you thing. You know what I mean? It's not like the world is against, and it kind of is. The world isn't against specifically just you, it's your community. And that's where we kind of relate to the Black feminist thinking. That train of thought really didn't exist until Black women came together and started being like, hey, we have issues these white women face, but we also have these other things that aren't being addressed, and we need to address it. So, in my perspective, that was the beginning of that train of thought, that beginning of let's address all the things that make our lives easier and difficult, you know?
In your mind, how do you think racism plays into that?
It depends. Like, racism is such a complicated thing, especially now where, like, no one, and I mean no one, is racist at all. Like, not one, even the people who are like, kill all the thugs who happen to be Black, like, they're not racist either. Think about that. But, I definitely think it's complicated, and it's built into our history in America. Like, from day one, like they say, police officers were actually formed from slave catchers. So, like, it all starts from the beginning of our country and hasn't really changed a lot since then. You know what I mean? Like, we've made improvements. Things have gotten better than the past in minor, very slight ways. But, like, if you really think about it, all the things that go on, the Black Lives Matter movement, like, all of it relates to stuff that went on way before our time. You know?
But those things are still they're still with us right now.
And they
I have
are. And
when
that's
I think of what you're talking about in regards to that, I'm reminded of a piece within the original statement of the Combahee River Collective in 1977 that really breaks down in many ways a political perspective that I think extends across all of the Black sphere, and especially among black women. And this early on in my own process really spoke to me, and it really in many ways spurs my organizing. It's a part that reads: the fact that racial politics and indeed racism are pervasive factors in our lives did not allow us, and still does not allow, most Black women to look more deeply into our own experience, and from that sharing and growing consciousness to build a politics that will change our lives and inevitably end our oppression.
personal is
You
political.
could, yeah, and in a sense, yes, that is an early version of that very phrase. But I also look and see that phrase in the context of right now, where we are seeing in many ways Black women take the lead in as far as, like, for example, the slogan right now every election time now is trust Black women and listen to Black women, because Black women go to the
Yeah,
polls and
not
are
getting
going to
listened to.
polls in droves. But
Yeah.
now let's take one step further. Why do you think that there is still in some ways a disconnect between cis, straight, and queer when we talk about that?
What are you asking? So, it's because people kind of like differentiate. People see these different labels as making them a completely different category than the next person, when, like, people are people. We're all one human race. And you've got to acknowledge, like, hey, if someone I know is going through a very difficult time, sorry, multitasking, like I keep saying. Yeah, if someone I know is going through a difficult time, I can't really look at it and be like, oh, grab your bootstraps and like make it through. It's got to be more of an understanding between people's differences, as well as working together to come together to a better solution, a better future for all of us. You know?
In your mind, being a trans woman, what's the one thing that you'd want to tell? What's one thing you'd want to tell our sisters who are cisgender, and our brothers and others who tend to be cis and also tend to be somewhat, I'm going to say it, transphobic? What's the things we need to understand to lift the veil of ignorance? What are some things that they need to understand? What are your keys to some understanding here?
You're asking really great questions, Karleigh. um, I would say, at the end of the day, we're all Black, you know? And to build barriers between ourselves makes it so much harder for the rest of us, including the person who's probably judging or like making it very difficult for that trans Black person to exist. You know, there's so many opportunities to work together and like build a stronger, healthier community. And instead of focusing on that, we kind of tear each other apart, which has been something since slavery. You know, I keep saying.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of that right now when I'm seeing, for example, on my Twitter, when I'm having because one of the things I do in addition to a lot of my organizing, and again, shout out to my red and proud, to my red. I always say I'm red and Black and trans. So shout out to all my PSO peoples out there. And all my PSO peoples, all my athlete peoples, all my Comoras community center peoples, all my people in the struggle. One thing that I'm seeing, like in my Twitter and some of the writing I'm doing, is somebody actually stepped to me and said, I'm a Black woman and I'm gender critical. And that's one thing we need to talk about. I just want to throw it out there. If you identify as Black like me, but identify also as a trans exclusionary radical feminist, you got problems. Quite frankly, you tap down. No, exactly. You understand that you're capping for patriarchy. You're capping for white supremacist patriarchy, and that is the arch enemy of everything we're trying to do, not just as a Black queer community, but as an overall queer community.
Yeah, it's definitely working against the greater good. It's working against yourself in a lot of ways. Because instead of focusing on the important stuff, like, say, the housing issue in Connecticut and the rest of the United States, or like the fact that we're in the middle of the pandemic, you're focusing on this one person, how you don't agree with them.
Well, but let's talk about that, because I want to go back to that for a minute, because we talked a little bit about the state sanctioning, and the state sanctions everything we do.
Yeah.
How does our own internal squabbling actually help the oppressor, in your mind? And how are we still doing it even when we know better, especially in what we've gone through in this last year and a half or so?
Well, you're assuming that everybody knows better and they don't. I'm not saying that in a negative sense. Not everyone realizes that, hey, a lot of these ideas that have been ingrained in our minds from a very early age aren't something that is historically Black. You know what I mean? So like being anti-LGBT, believe it or not, is not historically Black. It's something that began with us learning Christianity and being forced to believe in the white Christian God, you know? This is going to be a big conversation right now.
Well, that's what we're here for, to have this big conversation. Just a reminder to all of you out there who are watching, send a question in and be a part of this conversation, because these are conversations we need to be taught. These are conversations we need to be having. as I say often when I'm a part of the panels that we do here for the New Haven Pride Center, this is not just a matter of a conversation. This is a matter of community self-defense. When we talk about the things when we talk about where our weak points could be, where our vulnerabilities are, we strengthen our community. So again, this is community self-defense. And one part of self-defense and self-care is joy. Ravyn, where do you find your Black trans girl joy? Where do you find it?
I'm still looking for it. We'll figure this out one day, like down the road. I'm kidding. Honestly, just being at home and not stressing, not worrying about what's coming next or who I have to go after now. Like, just being able to enjoy life as is. That's my peace. And also, like, not having people in my mind and in my life who are always against anything and everything I represent.
Well, what are the things that you represent? When someone says, when you talk about that word represent, what does that mean to you? What do you represent?
Black trans and kind of chubby. I'm a chubby little lady right here. But just me, honestly. I represent myself, and in a lot of ways, representing myself, people perceive as representing the entire Black trans community, which is unfair on everybody because we can all just be ourselves, you know? Not everyone has to fit into some sort of scope or idea or any of that, really. They can just be themselves. And I feel like that in itself, being yourself and living life as yourself, as a trans Black woman of color, that's just me. That's what really leads you towards a better happiness.
Well, and Ravyn, I want to get a little interplay on this because I'm just want to say anything you want to ask me because hey,
No, I get it. I know
what's
you're a
that?
feminist. I'm not even going to ask that.
No, anything. Because actually, there's a question I do want to throw up to you, but I wanted to give you a chance to
Do
fire
it.
one
Just
back if you want
ask
it.
me all the questions you got, and
Okay.
I'll answer it to the best of my ability.
Okay. Well, then one thing I do want to talk about is what are a few things that you know now that you wish that you knew at the beginning of this ride, or when you were just an egg trying to figure it all out? What are some of the things that you would love to go back in time and tell Ravyn at the beginning?
You don't need this. So what I mean by that is, like, I kind of started with my story. Like, I went to college, tried to find community, and like couldn't find it. I would tell myself that, like, first off, there is a reason you don't identify with the thing people are categorizing you as, right? So a part of me growing up is everyone just assumed I was gay. No one like took the time to like ask me what I felt or thought or even, you know, presented myself as. It was kind of the assumption. And I went with it. But like I never really sat there and was like, what am I? I never took the time to really like understand my identity, my sexual identity, and like all those little things that people kind of assign to me. You know what I mean? So I would say to my younger self, take the time to learn yourself. Don't wait until you're 25. Like, take that time to really evaluate and understand yourself before allowing others to make that decision for you. Yeah.
That sounds like something I should have told my younger self a long time ago. Because I'm right there with you. I would have told my younger self, first, you're enough. And secondly, you are who you are. And third, that you're extra. Own it. And I want to talk about that concept because we say it a lot. But what are we really talking about especially being who we are and being in the situations that we're in and the work that we do, what are we really talking about when we talk about owning it? In your mind, what are we really, when we tell ourselves we are who we are and we own it, what are we really saying? And what do we feel we should be saying in making that declaration?
You know what? I have an interesting. It doesn't really answer your question, but like, it's a little interesting story related to the question, right? So, I'm with a pothead. Occasionally, I indulge in like, you know, the marijuana and all that. But yeah, this one day I made some brownies, and I'm not like a serious smoker like most people. Like, I do it once in a million, and like, yeah, it's cool. But long story short, I made brownies, ate them, and I kid you not, I was having like a conversation in my own head with my Aiden ego. Do you guys know what that is? Yeah. And that was the first time I like in my entire life that I really like questioned my true identity. And like right after questioning it, I realized, no, I am who I am, you know? And if people can't accept that, then they can go about their lives because I'm going to live mine just like they're going to live theirs, you know?
And when you think about that, how does that and that mind, what kind of strength and what kind of boost does that give you? Be it mentally, be it physically, be it metaphysically, to have that outlook.
It's empowering. It's empowering to realize that you don't really need like anyone other than yourself. And it sucks to say because people like to think, oh, I need my friends, my family, but like at the end of the day, like if you've got yourself, that's all you really need in life.
Well, I'm going to disagree with that.
You
In
can
one
disagree.
area, because you're right in that it has to start with you. Because I have a line in a poem that I wrote earlier this year that says, I found that my individual works best in a collective. And it was a poem about how finding my queerness unlocked the key to so many things. And I'm a believer that it starts with you, and you have to build within yourself. And there's times when you have to, as you say, you have to understand and look what's inside you. But also when you have that empowerment, somebody else can use it too.
Yeah.
I'm a believer in community. And I think that's one of the things that especially when we're having, that's why we have these conversations and especially in queer community. The first community I will talking about a little bit of my own process. The first community that I truly had in many ways in my life, that was something where I really found that from the beginning, I didn't have to have a tryout. I was accepted. Was this queer family I found? Was this queer family? And a lot of that queer, and some of this queer family is watching here. You're in that queer family, Ravyn.
Aww.
I'm gonna throw that. I'm gonna throw that out there. You're a piece of that. And for me, that queer family, and that queer family that has many hues, many shades, and that's gonna follow into the next question. That queer family gave me so much. At the beginning, it gave me a path. It gave me a path that says there's possibilities here, but we can't hold your hand to go on that path. You actually have to walk it. And that's where the individual part comes in to me. The individual comes in the fact that if you want, is that there are people that'll help you get the knowledge you're seeking. That'll help you on the quest, but you have to slay the dragon on your own, whatever that dragon is. But at another level, if you are willing to put some of that work in, your community is willing to back you up and be there with you. So I'm a believer. Again, my individual, I found my individual because at the beginning I was embraced by a collective that pushed me forward and said, hey, we're here with you, but you got to go do that work. And within that mind, do you think it's important for non-Black queer folks to step into this conversation, as our sister Kimura would say, and become queer Black feminists? Why or why not? And in your mind, if so, what does that look like?
So, um, yeah, I come from a completely different train of thought. So, and this is only my personal experience. Like, I'm so happy that that worked out for you. But like, whenever I attempted to make that community that like build on those relationships, build on that trusting, like, hey, I need some help with guidance. I never really got that from the LGBT community. I got it more, ironically, from cis, white, heterosexual males, which is weird, right? Like, when you think about it, you would think it'd be the opposite, but like, I've always found that what you think isn't always what the reality is, you know? But like, no, I'm totally happy for you. I'm happy for all the people who have the ability to find community within their community. I just never had that experience, you know?
Now, within that mind, where do you think the disconnect was? And moving forward, how do we, as in the community, and in a sense, being leaders and elders in it, how do we fill that gap so that somebody coming along who's coming into their own and coming into their truth is not saying that no, there was a disconnect there, and in a sense, I was looking for my community, but there was no community there. How do we, as a community, not drop that ball in the future for that next one?
Oh no, community existed. It just didn't accept me. That was the weird part. Like, it existed, it just didn't accept me and my Blackness and or my feminist views and like any of that, because sometimes I'm just a little bit too strong. Sometimes I'm a little bit too Black. Sometimes, you know.
But I want to pick up on that, because no, that is something
Do
that
it.
we
We can
that's
have
something that we hear.
ask
No,
all the questions
that's
you
something
want.
because that's something we all deal. That's something many of us deal with.
Yeah.
Being in Black spaces, being in white spaces, being in non-Black spaces, being in spaces where there is anti-Blackness present, and being Black.
Yeah.
And being Black. What do our non-Black queer community, who we've already talked about, we are in a fight for our lives again. Seems like we're never out of it. And this is some mission critical information that people need to know. What is it? Is it important in your mind that no, we have to get up to speed? In my mind, it is. You got to get up to speed if you want to survive.
Well, what
And
do you
if
mean by
so,
getting
what
up
does
to
that
speed?
look like? Well, for starters, exactly what you're talking about. We gotta have that anti-Blackness conversation among our peoples, and that means your edges are going to get. We're gonna take your edges once in a while. It means you're gonna get your card pulled once in a while. That's what it means. It means people's edges are gonna get taken, cards are gonna get pulled, and there's gonna be some hard feelings. To
You know
quote
what's
the video
interesting?
gamers, you're gonna get butthurt a little bit.
Andre Lord calls that something gaze. There's like a particular time for it, and Karleigh, you probably know it better than I do because you are good with the names. But she definitely references having this actual conversation where we like address our issues between one another and like how we can potentially mend it. But like, it never goes as easy. At least thinking about it, I've never actually like gone through the process of like doing exactly what Audre Lorde suggests. But like, thinking about it, some feelings will get hurt. Some people will definitely have that knee-jerk reaction. But like, having those conversations of like, this is my issue with this, or particularly this group of people,
Well,
addressing it, finding ways around it. Like, okay, so like if you have this issue with this group of people, first off, not all of them are the same. That's an easy right there. So like, what exactly started this issue? Where did it come from? How do we address it? You know?
Well, give me an example. What is an issue where you think where is our non-black queer family dropping the ball when it comes to their black queer kinfolk? Where's our wider community dropping the ball? Let's have this. Let's do this.
You're asking the wrong one. I'm not a part of that community. But I don't know. I think in terms of the LGBT community itself, learning that we're more alike than different. And there's a lot of different things that we could do to like unify ultimately the majority, because the minority are the rich white people who aren't having to interact with people like us. So really coming together and like having those difficult conversations and coming to the understanding that like no one's trying to get over on anyone else. It's just all of us trying to survive, all of us trying to make it to a point where we're all living a sustainable life without the struggles of like a pandemic. You know?
Well, how has the pandemic affected you?
Personally?
I mean,
Not
personally,
much.
as an organizer, as across the board, how
Oh,
has the
yeah.
pandemic affected you?
I would say that the pandemic definitely kind of interfered on outreach. Everything shut down. Everything was very difficult to like. No one could meet in person, and then I was working for a hospital, so like they had their own guidelines, and even though the part of the hospital I worked for was a nonprofit, we still had to follow the guidelines of the hospital because we're a part of them. We're an entity of that hospital, right? So like it just made it very complicated and difficult to like actually get in touch with people and like get people to show up to these online events. Not always impossible, but like it was really difficult making that transition from doing things in person the way that we used to do things to now, okay, we have to change everything and now rewrite the script and do something different to make our goals, you know? So, yeah, it wasn't easy, but we've definitely gotten a lot better. And I think things have, as far as the nonprofit world, it's gotten a little bit easier as we've gotten better with this transition, as we've gotten better with the things that have taken place and how to adjust to all of that.
No, that's a very interesting way to put it. I want following up on that. How has it? Because one thing nonprofits have had to go. One thing that nonprofits have had to deal with is just that transition. But you're saying, in what has been a specific thing that has made it easier from what you're seeing? Because a lot and how can others replicate it? Because a lot of nonprofits have taken it on the chin in this pandemic.
True, a lot have like actually stopped offering services, which is really sad, including True Colors, which I'm very curious what's going on with that at the moment because I know they were trying to like reorganize and I don't know. We'll see.
Well, I'm glad you're talking about that because that flows in many ways into the question that Vanity Fair has just put up. When is the time to have those type of conversations to address the quote, I have an issue with this from my community and this specific community. Are we concerned with the mess or is that just real talk? And some of what some of the issue with True Colors plays into that question here.
Yeah. No, definitely. It's all connected. You know, everyone's got their own, every community has their own thing, but like It's all interconnected at the end of the day.
Well, I'm of the thought that there's no bad time to have these conversations, and especially right now, we need to have those war councils more. We need to have them more because of a lot of things I'm seeing in the landscape. I'm seeing one of the biggest things I'm seeing is the class striations are getting deeper,
Most
and
definitely.
and within our community,
We already
because
had a disadvantage.
what was that?
We did. I said we already had a disadvantage, and everything has made it
Because I'm hearing
a little bit more
like for
complicated.
myself, I'm just gonna stay. I gotta spit my own rhyme here for a minute. One of the biggest things that we're talking about right now is, again, and I'm going to be hitting there's two things I'm hitting like a drum very hard, and one is this housing crisis, because right now there's some of us in our community got some means that can help alleviate this thing, and we need you in the game. There are certain lawmakers that, hey, we need you in the game because this is going to be an issue. And if we start
It
seeing
already
more,
is. That's the other
it's
one.
been an issue. That's one thing.
Yeah.
But also another thing is, right now we have languishing on a desk in Washington D.C. is the most far-reaching civil rights legislation in this nation in 60 years, and there are some of us who are content to wait and cut deals to get that done, and have compromises to get that done, rather than mass march and get this done.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing we definitely need to talk about. And since we need our mojo, I mean, one thing I'm seeing is that we need to keep the street heat that we've had in this last year going. We have things to fight for, and
We
we have
do.
and again, we have a duty to win. So in many ways, we need to have these conversations. Because one of the biggest problems I have within our specific community is that too often some of us get too complacent, or we think it's not us,
Yes. No, I get it.
or we think it's not us. We voted blue. We got our people in. We got rid of orange guy bad. But the mess is still here.
It is.
The mess is still here.
Just because you
And
did everything you thought you had to doesn't mean it's not going to work out.
and
That's
and
something
that's
I
one of my
definitely
biggest
wanna
things.
talk
So to me, these conversations need to be had. And to answer that question for my own self, I think it's important that people across our community get in the game, and get in it. And to me, there's a way it looks like, and there's a way for non-Black queer folks to step into this conversation, and you step into it by listening. And yes, sometimes listening is going to involve getting your edges snatched. It's going to happen. It is going to happen. And sometimes it's going to involve you getting upset and you hearing things that you don't want to hear. It's going to involve you maybe even sulking a little bit. But I'm going to say this, especially to my non-Black queer family. We all go through it in this path towards enlightenment. We all go through it in this path towards liberation. You don't know what you don't know. And in many ways, what a society is willing to not teach you. Learning much of liberation is showing up and learning what you do not know. And the way it looks like, it starts with the listening, and it means it means hard listening, and it means hard learning. And it also is going to mean you have to be and it means you're going to have to leave critical white theory behind and get some critical race theory in you. And you may have to get some critical you theory in you. And that's something we all need to do in this ride. I know I needed it in my process. Critical Karleigh theory, that was the hardest class I ever had to take, and I'm still taking it. And at times it hurts. It leaves marks. to learn about all that trauma and all those things that you deal with, but that's part of that listening. That in mind, I want to, since we're running short on time, we got to get this question in. Do you feel that Black queer feminism and coming into that has gifted you something? At the same time, do you feel it's taken something away?
Personally, I think it's gifted me the ability to think about others, which Allah has definitely brought up Black queer or Black femme people being used for the emotional support and emotional baggage. But most definitely, like, I believe my Black feminist thinking personally has helped me to, yes, address and acknowledge the things that go on in my own life, but also work towards understanding other people's struggles. So, like, yeah, I may be a Black trans person, but, like, personally, I've never identified as someone with a serious disability, you know? And being able to comprehend, maybe not feel what the person feels, but, like, comprehend how their world works to help them to a better spot, or even someone with a record, criminal, felons, understanding that, like, they probably didn't get to that point just to be a bad person. There's something that probably led up to it, and, like, understanding how to better work and understand them, you know? Everyone's got their thing. And, like, I feel like having a Black feminist thinking, frame of thought, I should say, helps you to look at it from a different lens. Because you're not just looking at it from that one aspect, that one identity, that one area of concern. It's multiple different things compounding into one.
Now that, again, in many ways, that goes back to us talking about my individual works best in a collective. The thing that Black queer feminism has helped me give up is a lot of selfishness, a lot of selfishness, a lot of inner self doubt, and a lot of fear. Because they talk about how, because it's that whole theory of a colonized mind, you wear the chains tighter and higher. Coming into my queerness and my Blackness and my transness, all in those directions, those broke my chains. And what it's gifted me is so much. It's gifted me a lot of courage. That's what it's given me. It's given me a lot of courage. And to end it here, I mean, Ravyn, I'm going to give you the last word on this. But to end it here, as far, because what I want to look at is what's one thing that you want people to take with themselves going forward, especially as we're going into this beautiful Pride Week here across New Haven and across Connecticut. The one thing I want people to take going forward is that we are a strong community with a history of resistance, with a history of sacrifice, and with a history of courage. And that sacrifice and that courage is needed right now. I want to remind you, actually, the slogan of the new news source I write for, Outsports: courage is contagious. And it is contagious. But to gain that courage, we must be ready to step into these hard conversations, step into the work that needs to be done, and keep stepping into it. I say often, being a socialist, that revolution is not just one big thing. Revolution is a lot of small things done day after day after day. It's a lot of small things that's done over days, over periods of months, and over periods of years until we get that goal. And we will get to that goal. We will get to our liberation, but we're not getting there leaving anyone behind. And that means we have to have the courage to bring each other together. Ravyn, what do you want to leave us with as we head into this Pride Week?
Karleigh, I love you. I would say, if you need help, ask for it. Somewhere someone somewhere is going to be there to either help guide you, lead you to someone who may be able even more knowledgeable about what you're going through or something. But like if you need help, ask for it for sure. And then also be safe. I'll admit there were times through my transition where I really truly was not safe. But like remember to be safe.
Ravyn, thank you for joining me this afternoon. And thanks to all of you for joining us this afternoon. And again, stepping into these conversations, yes, it's hard, but it is a measure of our community self. This is community self-defense of what we need to do. And what Ravyn says is very profound and very important. And Vanity Affair says it best: if they know how to ask for help. That in itself can be difficult, but one thing is, it doesn't take much to ask for help. All you gotta do is open your mouth. And also it's contingent upon all of us in community to be there and to be present. Because sometimes somebody may not ask, but they're there, and we have to be present enough to pick up on it. Something to think about as we head into this beautiful Pride Week. And now with some more closing thoughts from New Haven Pride Center, a Pride Center which is I'm proud to be a member of. Juan Carlos Soto.
Hey, thank you so much for this amazing conversation, Karleigh and Ravyn. You two were amazing. I was sitting here with my mouth open half the time and just snapping a lot. And thank you for being so honest and vulnerable and open. This was an amazing conversation, and I think one of the best ways so far that we've been able to celebrate Pride. And I have to say that all of the Pride programming is done in thanks to all of the effort that we, the staff, put in, but also our volunteers, and obviously the incredible artists and speakers like yourselves that are here. So we invite you to continue to celebrate with us for the rest of the week. Visit our website, newhavenpridecenter.org, for more details. And if you're feeling generous and want to continue to help us make programming like this happen, make a donation at newhavenpridecenter.org. You can do it on Venmo or Cash App. Where we make it easy. We're not fancy. Just give us your money and we'll make amazing work happen. Right?
And they have ever since this pandemic started. I got to say this, Juan Carlos, because this is important, and I've said it often. Since March last year, when so many other sources within our community had to stand down and shut down, this Pride Center stood up. This Pride Center expanded and stood up and kept it going. So the best, I wrote a poem where I said that we can't give them a championship ring, but we can ring their cash register. So during this Pride Week, ring that cash register. It matters. If you haven't joined the Pride Center, consider being a member. Yes. It's the best money you'll ever spend for the programming that they put together. And also it means even more because if this Pride Center through this crisis was there and those doors didn't shut down, not for an instant, they had to change things, but nothing shut down and helped a lot of people in the process. And the best way to thank them is to make sure that throughout, as the next storm comes, we can keep this great programming going. So please give. Please.
Thank you so much, and happy Pride. Bye, everybody.